Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another thing where I talk about things. Just as some general updates on the site, I think I would start with that. I've been looking at the website, some of the statistical tools available, and just kind of trying to figure out where we're going with things. We're doing okay. It seems like we've stabilized out as far as viewers go. We are not losing anyone. We are not gaining anyone, unfortunately. So we are staying at about a predictable rate. This is good, but our goal is to earn another, we're trying to figure out how to earn another $1,200 per month. This is the big hurdle because Peter and I split the money. If we earn that extra $1,200 somehow, and I don't know for sure how we're going to do it, but if we can figure out a way to earn another $1,200 a month, then that means that we will be earning enough that it would be pointless to work at a place like CVS. And that is my life's goal, is to get away from that kind of thing. You know, just because retail work is terrible. And while I do have hope for being that I would be one of the people affected by the minimum wage hikes, I do have hope for it. I know that some people, for some reason, are deeply against it. I don't really know why exactly. I see lots of bizarre things about it. The biggest one they talk about has to deal with the the job stuff, as they feel like people will lose jobs and hours, and that's a big subject of debate. Economists actually do fight with each other about it. There's not a complete one side or the other response. There's some studies that are kind of supportive of either stance. It depends on who you really want to listen to. But personally, like I said, I'm one of the people who would get a wage hike if I got it, and I throw my support behind giving me more money. In general, it seems like a good idea for someone such as myself. But really though, I'd like to just get that extra bit over for the website. It's kind of, what can I say? It's weird. But we started doing a little bit more advertising, and we've just been talking a little bit about extra stuff that we can do, and I don't know. I mean, like if you guys have any ideas on ways that we could advertise a little bit more. Our main thing is just that we got to get more of an audience for some of the auxiliary stuff we do. I mean, if we could even so much as, well, I don't know. We would have a ways to go. But point is, that's all aside. This is where we are with the website. Just news on that, update on that, because it's been a little while since I've talked about it. Patreon is going great. Not to say that like things aren't doing well. We're getting by. We're doing okay. We're stable. Patreon has really made a huge difference, and so we're really happy about that. We appreciate those guys, those of you guys who are supporting us. I know that I would like to do the reward thing. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I could fit in another Monday music thing, and like you guys can, I don't know. I'll have to think of something. It's just hard to get enough time to fit everything in. But anyway though, today, away from more of the business stuff, I would actually like to talk about webcomics, a slightly softer subject. Webcomics, because as I've been looking more into advertising and also paying attention to our own advertisers, which is a potential source of revenue, I have seen some bizarre advertisements, or advertisements for rather bizarre things. Two of the webcomics I'd like to discuss actually have advertised with us once, and the other two have shown up on 4chan. And I won't say where they show up, because they've shown up in places that were not the comics board, so we will just say that they showed up someplace interesting, someplace where it's totally allowed, and the moderators need not hunt it down and destroy this stuff, because these are one of the good things about if you browse the boards at the right times of day, you find really good threads in places they do not belong. I don't know why that is. I think it's because if you go the places where they do belong, then there's already an established culture, and people don't want to see that. So yes. Anyway though, the first comic I'd like to talk about is called the Stanford Webcomics Experiment. And this one I thought was really interesting. This webcomic doesn't seem to have a lot of viewers, and it's because the entire thing is just sort of like almost a bizarre meta joke on the very idea of doing comics. Because it kind of looks at the whole world of comics, and not just online comics, and just says to itself, like, what is really going on with all this stuff? The Stanford Webcomics Experience, it's an experience really, experiment, it features 3 characters. There's one dude, one girl, the token girl of course, and a guy who also happens to be a vampire. And their entire existence in this comic is really, they don't do anything, mostly. Just every single day, the author will post something, and sometimes it'll be horrible puns, and other times it will be just bizarre stuff. Like, he'll post a comic, and it'll end in a really bad joke, and then he'll post it again, but he'll, like, flip the comic around, so it's a mirror image. He just does a 180 flip, and then that's tomorrow's comic. Or he'll do something where he'll post the same comic 7 times in a row throughout an entire week, and then at the end of the week, he'll make a joke about how he posted 7 comics in a row. And he does this frequently enough. Like, sometimes you'll also see him, if you keep up with webcomics, you'll see that he read one of those webcomics, then he came back and he basically ripped off their joke, but changed it so it's like the most boring, like not even good. It's like it just kind of strips away the context to the most bare bones. And so it's experimental because you can see the way that it's kind of like, it almost seems like he's just testing, like, what will cause people to come back and look at my website again? And I could not browse through the whole comic archive, but it was just one of those things where I just kind of like, I would flip through some of them and then skip ahead for their dates and then flip through more. And sometimes I would just crack up, and it was the strangest thing psychologically, because it was just the most horrible, like, deadpan, never really very funny, and then suddenly there would be one comic and it would be so bad. Or he would just do the same thing for like the 100th time, and by the 100th time you had seen it, I would just crack up because it was just like, it was so stupid, and he just kept doing it. And by like I think Garfield, many moons ago, the Garfield show did a segment on this, where they kept doing this really bad pun. It was like they would call for lights, and then like a bunch of hands would come in, and they would all be holding lights. And so they just keep doing it, and then by the end, see Garfield go, see, some jokes are funny where if you just keep repeating the same terrible joke over and over again, eventually people start to laugh at it because it's just so bad, and you won't stop. And so he does that. He's just got this persistence. And like I say, it's weird. But then if it was funny once, he'll do it again, and it stops being funny, and then he just keeps doing it. And so, the Stanford webcomic experiment. Strange comic, not one that you can read for a long time, but certainly one that's different because of how similar it is to webcomics in general. Really, if you've ever seen dinosaur comics, which basically takes the exact same set of panels and changes the conversation every time, it's very similar to that in its mindset, but just not as clever, or perhaps brilliant. I don't know. It's really hard to say. It depends on your perspective, I guess. But anyway, Stanford webcomics experiment. The second one is probably one that you guys might be a little bit more familiar with. Actually, no, okay, like I said, I won't tell you where I found this one, but this came from 4chan. These two webcomics came from different parts of 4chan. This is one of the ones from 4chan. It is called Goblins, and some of you guys are probably familiar with Goblins. Goblins is rather famous for just how bizarrely terrible the art and story direction is. It's a comic kind of about a role-playing game, as far as I understand it. And because it's popped up, there's not usually a consistent thread following the story. It's just that something will pop up, and then people will comment, and they'll say, like, what's the logic behind this? Or what is going on in this panel? Because a lot of times, the art is inconsistent, and so what you'll get is something like a dwarf will lay down on his shield, and somehow this is supposed to be a really menacing moment, but you're just looking at it, and only the creator really knows why this is a scary moment for the characters. It's very strange, but one of the most popular jokes that came out of Goblins is the "I'm sad" joke, because he has a real thing for torture, and so he just tortures, kills, and maims his characters. He'll invent characters specifically just to kill them, and then everyone stops to be really sad about it. You know, and by the 100th time, you'd think that they would be a little bit inured to the suffering, but they never really do get tired of it. They just continue to cry and suffer and tell everyone how sad they are every time a new friend dies. And it's weird, they go to like multiple dimensions, they have this thing, and it's supposed to be based on real D&D rules, like Dungeons and Dragons rules. But the sticklers for rules, in places where this comic is illegally posted, will tell you that basically none of the rules are ever followed. So just a really strange one, more as an observation, a good one to learn from if you want to see good ways not to lay out your webcomic, or good ways to make a comic rather confusing. This guy has some really good examples. Unfortunately, somewhat of a weaker comic to discuss because it's more. If I could bring Pederep in for this one, I imagine he could probably tell you a lot more about it because it's more to do with the way that he designs the comic. Like I said, the writing is a touch bland, but the art is just so bizarre. But anyway, though, third comic in the set. Yes, I had to think about it for a minute. This one is called Bumrush Comics. It's about the story of this character called Red. And this one is interesting because I first saw it advertised on our website, and I thought it was some kind of like Raymond knockoff, except with like a girl with a great big chest. And I didn't click on it when it came up because I could obviously see, I was like, oh, girl with a great big chest. I know who this is targeted to. And I figured, you know, a lot of times when they rely too much on sex, that you tend not to have a very good story. And unfortunately, Bumrush Comics suffers from this a bit. They actually have a better premise than I thought they did. Later on 4chan, I actually saw someone was posting this comic, and they were posting it in a thread that was talking about weird comics. And, which prompted me to finally just go and look at it, because here's what was bizarre about it. I said that it reminded me of Rayman, right? Well, it turns out that this female character, the protagonist, it's not just like a cartoony little thing. This is not the world. It's that the female protagonist is just legitimately paraplegic. And not like paraplegic in a way like she doesn't have arms due to like a wound of some sort. Like she just has no arms. Like she structurally was born without the arms. And you think that maybe this would be a big thing, like maybe the guy who wrote this comic had some kind of goal, some kind of political motivation for designing a character that had no arms. But as you read the comic, you find out that, no, there's really no reason the character has no arms. This guy just chose to give his female character no arms and giant boobs. Because the other thing that he does is he gives her these robotic hands that float around and she controls them with her brain, which is why I thought that it was a Rayman thing, because she just had these floating hands that were following her around in all the ads. She doesn't really, like, you know, it becomes... I don't know. This is why I bring it up as one of those things that I thought was just rather bizarre. And someone pointed it out on 4chan. Like, I remember just asking about it. I was like, so she legitimately just has no arms. And the guy goes, yeah, it's actually, it's a fetish, is what it is. And as you go through the comic, you kind of notice that it's very much cheesecake. And if you're not familiar with that term, it's kind of a slang term. It means that it's kind of hypersexualized, and the female characters, they're not really, like, well-toned. They kind of look like they lay around the house a lot. Like they still have very feminine figures, but the female characters, they're just not like, they're not built. They just look like ladies that like to sit and watch television. So yeah, so it's a cheesecake comic. About 80% of it is like fan service, and that's the main thing that kind of bugged me about it. Was although the artist is decent, the real problem I have with the comic was that as I started to read it, the pacing was very slow. And so the first thing I did is I kind of started to read a few panels, and then I skipped way ahead towards the end. And as it's going along, I think his pacing is starting to improve, which prompted me to go back and kind of catch up on some more of the stuff. But starting off, you can really see that the motivation behind the comic was just to draw a sexy female character with no arms. And this is one of those that just, while the comic is improving, and I'm actually not bashing the comic, because if you go and you read it, you might find that you might enjoy it, for reasons aside from the cheesecake. I just find it interesting, because with the self-publishing, it's one of those things where, unlike some of the other people on this list, who may well be crazy, Bumrush Comics seems to be put together by a fairly sane-minded individual, who just found this concept rather attractive, and then just ran with it. And it's something like, I think that if you pitched it to most people, most of them would throw it right out the window. But who knows, Bumrush Comics might be poised to be a really decent comic if it keeps going. It just started out, it's brand new as of the date of this video, so there's not a whole lot to see yet. But like I say, bizarre, just bizarre, one of those things that you would think wouldn't make a very good concept, and it actually is okay. To further elaborate, the premise is that you have a girl and she sort of has superpowers, kind of, in that she has these super weapons that were bought for her by a large company that is being contracted to kill superheroes and super beings. And the reason why they are contracted to kill these people, they're paid by the government to kill superheroes because this is something I always thought was interesting, is take Sandman from like the Spider-Man universe. The man can control sand. And I always thought to myself, like, why would Sandman turn to crime? Why not replace the construction sector? Why not just become a one-man construction company, you know? Go out there and mix up your own concrete, because if you can control sand with your brain, then surely you could make the best concrete in the world. You could probably do a lot of stuff, like, for a really decent amount of money if you had that kind of superpower. There would be no reason to turn to crime, and yet that's what Sandman did. He was not very creative. Well, the comic sort of asks this same question, but then says, oh, because the corporations that already make money by doing this would pay people to kill you. So this is what Red does, is she's actually hired to kill super beings who are taking over jobs that normally make money for large corporations, like big oil companies and stuff like that. So it's basically corporate assassinations is what it is. So kind of an interesting premise. Don't know where they're necessarily going to go with that, but not insane like the others. So anyway, though, the fourth comic, though, this one I saved for last because there's a lot of it, and it is so bizarrely stupid. I actually sat through a whole thread, and it's so captivatingly ridiculous. It's got artwork that is just bad. It's called Crash Bandicoot 2. No. Crash Retold, and there's sequels. There's Crash Retold 1, and then later on he goes on to Crash Retold 2. How to describe this story? Okay, if you guys are familiar with Chris Weston Chandler, who's rather famous on 4chan for the fact that he built a character called Sonichu, and Sonichu is this... basically, it's Pikachu and Sonic combined, and this guy, he's got a mental disability, but he made this comic, and the reason why he became famous was because he was a touch on the belligerent side. So he got in trouble because he would go to public places, and he would carry signs and wear t-shirts that were advertising that he was looking for a date, and then people would ask him to leave, and he would get rowdy with them. And I can't remember what all that he did to get so much notoriety, but just it was something like he was trying to promote attention to himself, and he got it, unfortunately. But it's on that kind of like same level of just like the artist has no real perspective of perspective. So the art is just this bizarre, almost kind of like most people could draw about on this guy's level. But what it's all about is, imagine if you thought that Crash Bandicoot needed to be Dragon Ball Z, and that is about the best way that I can sum it up, except it's crazier, because he just mashes characters from all kinds of different timelines and intellectual properties into this story that he calls Crash Bandicoot Retold. And you get into bizarre things like the time that Crash Bandicoot went Super Saiyan and then melded with the devil gene from Tekken, and then died and went to heaven where Harry Potter went when he lost the soul of Voldemort with his girlfriend, who is an angel, and then he comes back and he kills Frieza, basically. The plot is completely incomprehensible, but one of the things that just cracks me up is the way that he introduces original characters because people ask him to. There are people who follow him on DeviantArt, and they say, I made this character, can you put him in? And he just says yes. And so it's loaded up with like dozens, you know, like tons and tons, dozens and dozens of characters. And so you get to the epilogue, and he's like recounting what everyone is doing with their free time. And like I said, the art is so terrible and the storyline is so bad that people were drawing free art. They were like redrawing the stuff and like making people like one of the characters become Sephiroth but with robot legs, and the English is terrible. So he's like my legs are made of robotics now. Stuff like that. I've got, like I said, I have one of the fan arts saved because it was actually really good. It was like a really good redrawing of this Sephiroth Bandicoot character. But they're just all these OCs, and he gets to the end, and he's like, this guy's doing this, and this guy's doing that, and this guy's doing this, and there's no way you can remember how many characters there are, because there's like 20 of them. And then, like, a bunch of them are female, and here's the one that's strange, is he draws them all, and every, like, other panel, somebody gets naked. And there's always some kind of excuse for it, but a lot of times the excuse is kind of left out. Like, they don't really explain it too well. There's also a scene, he inserts one lesbian character, and she has sex with a guy, and I believe that she's the first character to actually, like, do this in canon, and then have kids as a result of it. Everyone else is like, the other female characters are not even sleeping with dudes, but the one proclaimed female character actually is the one who gets knocked up. So, oh, and her excuse was, I just get really excited. like they're like, why did you sleep with this dude? Like, they ask it. Sometimes they stop to ask the questions because the writer realizes that unless you know what's going on in his head, there's no way you could figure out why this character would do the thing that she or he has done. And so he'll stop and he'll go, what is going on right now? And then people will just point blank tell you why they did the things. And so the lesbian character, she goes, sometimes I get really excited and I just kind of can't help myself. So she has twins, and what else can I really say about this comic? Crash Bandicoot Retold. A work of beauty. So, yes, self-publishing, a fascinating thing. It's one of those deals what is it called? It's something's law. That 90% of everything is terrible. And but the other 10% is actually really good. And the only problem is that when everyone can post their terrible stuff online, you never know where the good stuff is buried. It's really always hard to say. And of course, that's why people, when they find things that they do like, when they say like My Little Pony and they really like My Little Pony, they stick to My Little Pony because they know that as long as they can follow it, and it will be good until it starts to decline. And of course, people have their opinions about that. But that's why you get things like we do other videos aside from My Little Pony, and they haven't picked up the same following. For the 90% of everything is crap reason, is it just hard to tell. Like, you never know when you're going to look at stuff and find out that it's going to be good or find out that it's going to be bad. I know that there are much worse webcomics out there, but these are just the ones that I thought were interesting and worth talking about. So that is it for today. I will catch you guys later.